Story 1. The company I used to work for had a tree that was loose. Instead of cutting it down, they decided to save money. The tree fell in 2020 and killed my manager. It missed me by about 15 feet. Story 2. I was playing basketball one time and got heat stroke. I started feeling very weak, and my heart was beating very fast. Eventually, I collapsed on a chair, and it wasn't until someone saw how pale my face was that they took action. I got to the car and vomited on the floor. Apparently, I was passing out, but I don't remember. I just remember feeling extremely weak and very sweaty at the same time. I also had a heart condition and asthma, so I thought I was dying. Story 3. I should have drowned in the ocean due to a riptide. By sheer luck, someone came out to help, and we both almost drowned. I accepted that I was going to die and wondered who would take care of my cat. Story 4. Cliff. I was hiking near a large, empty creek with cliffs on the side when I slipped and nearly fell off the cliff. Luckily, my chest caught me, the only time it ever helped me. I was stuck halfway off a cliff, which had about a 15-foot drop onto solid and uneven rock. I grabbed rocks and a cactus to pull myself back up. A 15-foot fall is not necessarily fatal, but I was about a 10-minute walk from my house, so nobody knew where I was, and no one would look for me for at least 5 hours. If I had fallen, that would have been the end. Story 5. I once fell backward through a plate glass coffee table. Not a scratch. Huge shards that could have easily bled me dry. There are many more examples like that. My drinking is what almost killed me, most definitely. And yes, I put the bottle down years ago. Story 6. My first childhood dentist was dishonest. He convinced my parents I needed an unnecessary procedure, and then performed it so poorly that I developed a severe infection and almost died. When we consulted another doctor about the infection, the original x-rays were reviewed. That doctor confronted the first dentist because the x-rays showed nothing was wrong with my mouth before the procedure. That same year, I nearly died a second time because a teacher at school forced me to eat mostly raw chicken. It seemed people wanted me dead when I was 6, for some reason. Story 7. Separate incidents. Pneumonia with sepsis, organ failure, diabetic ketoacidosis with blood glucose 897. Cancer, COVID-19, kidney failure from botched chemotherapy, now liver failure. Still here. Edit. I want to thank everyone who upvoted or commented on this post. I would also like to recognize that a large part of why I am still here is pure luck, along with the help of many medical care providers. Story 8. My alcoholism was the most long-term damaging issue. Anyway, Gentleman Jack was my poison of choice. At one point, I was finishing a 750 milliliter bottle every night for almost a year straight. I have been sober for 2 years. Story 9. A beehive I did not know was there when I was helping to clear an overgrown lot. I also did not realize I had a bee allergy until I had to go to the hospital that day. Story 10-1. When I was in 6th grade during summer break, I went to the pool at our apartments with my mom. Mom wasn't paying attention. Someone asked if I knew how to swim and I said no. They picked me up and threw me in the deep end. I nearly drowned because my mom was too busy talking. I don't know who noticed, but if they hadn't, I wouldn't be here. When I was in 8th grade, I was bitten in the forehead by a brown recluse spider. I thought it was nothing but a bad zit. One day after a concert our choir had, a friend told me my skin was green. My parents didn't notice when I got home, so I shrugged it off. The next morning, I only woke up because I heard my mom screaming. My face was swollen so badly that my eyes were completely covered. By the time the emergency room saw me, the doctor screamed at the receptionist because 10 minutes later I could have been dead from the venom. I had to get multiple shots in the backside and shots in the bite itself. I was kept out of school for weeks to recover. I still have the scar in the middle of my forehead today. Sometime in high school, I was doing something as simple as crossing the road to go to my friend's house on the 4th of July. I noticed at the very end of the road there was a large white truck I had never seen before, but I couldn't see anyone inside because of the window tint. I shrugged it off and, with my dog, began to cross. As soon as I did, the truck revved and sped up as if to hit me. I jumped into a very overgrown ditch to avoid it, nearly choking my dog in the process, and hid there as the truck turned around and stopped beside me. I was so terrified and could not see the driver through the high grass, but I heard him get out and start looking for me. I honestly thought I was about to be kidnapped and killed. I would have been if not for the fact that the driver had a loud truck and my friend's father had seen it. I could hear my friend's dad screaming, "You better get in that truck and never come back or you won't ever be going anywhere else alive." The driver got in his truck and sped off like his life depended on it. Once I heard my friend's dad calling my name, I got up and saw him standing there with a crossbow. He was tough. I stayed at their place for a while before going home and telling my parents, but they didn't believe me. It took me several years to realize who it most likely was. A friend of mine had just dumped her boyfriend, and for some reason he believed it was my fault and not his own abusive tendencies. Not surprisingly, he had a big white truck. If I had known it then, I would have reported him, but that never happened. My only consolation is that he is most likely in prison somewhere now. As I like to tell people, my life is like a soap opera sometimes. Story 11. There was a time in swim class when I almost drowned. My swim teacher gave me and all the other students pool noodles to float on instead of life jackets, which the place did have, when he wanted us to learn how to swim in the deep end. I slipped and fell off my noodle, causing me to panic and almost drown. It took a minute for everyone to realize that I was not playing around and for my swim coach to save me. Another time happened a few months ago. I had a seizure in the bathroom, and because the door was locked, no one could get in. My sister heard a loud bang coming from the bathroom and knew something was wrong. She got my brother, and together they managed to kick the door open. When they did, they saw me lying on the shower floor with vomit coming out of my mouth. I was not taking a shower, so luckily I was not naked. I had just walked in there while having the seizure. My sister called emergency services and took me to the hospital. It was horrifying, but I am very thankful to both of them for helping me. Story 12. Improvised explosive device. We always ran the same route and stopped at the same spot. One day we pulled up for our short halt, and I just had a feeling. I told my crew to get out on the left instead of the right side. They all complained because the left side was exposed to fire if there were attackers. As soon as I stepped out, boom. I always step out and use the tires as cover. That saved my life, and my decision saved everyone else's too. Never create patterns and always listen to your gut. That was probably the 5th time I almost died that month. Story 13. A police officer ran me over in a Chevrolet Tahoe while I was tanning on the beach because he was texting. I had headphones on, so I did not hear him coming. I saw him at the last second and tried to roll out of the way but was too late. The front left wheel went over me, moving painfully slow because he was stuck on something, a human body. People screamed at him to stop, so he did with the wheel on top of me. I was trapped underneath the truck, so the whole beach rushed over to rock it and pull me out. The officer paced back and forth, panicking about his job. People screamed at him to call an ambulance while I was hypertensive on the ground. He called the ambulance as a non-emergency, worried about losing his job. Paramedics were angry because they did not have the equipment needed due to his false call. At least I can call myself the unsquishable cockroach now. Story 14. Pulmonary embolism almost got me last week. A blood clot traveled from my leg and lodged in my lung. Difficult experience. Story 15. My attacker waited until I was asleep to attack me and then smothered me when I woke up. Right after, he pushed my face into my pillow. I had a barely coherent thought of, "This is it. This man is going to kill me." Thankfully, I was spared. I do not know how I survived the lack of air and the immense shock and pain combined. Story 16. I went hypothermic twice. They put you in a large foil packet and pump hot air around you. I joked that I felt like a human hot pocket. Story 17. When I was 8, I slipped getting out of the bath and hit the base of my chin near the neck on the sink. This caused a large split to open, and all the muscle in my lower jaw spilled out. Fortunately, my aunt had just arrived in her car, so they were able to get me to the hospital. The medical team worked quickly to stitch me up to prevent excessive bleeding. The procedure was done in the ward because there was no time to take me to the operating room. I still have issues with the muscle and my tongue locking up even now, over 30 years later. Interestingly, when I returned to school, my friend had suffered almost the same injury. Story 18, my birth. First, my umbilical cord was wrapped around my neck. Then, after that was taken care of, I started turning blue. I had group B streptococcus and was having a hard time breathing. I survived, but had I been born during an earlier era, I might have been one of those who were dead on arrival. Story 19, ectopic pregnancy. I was rushed to the emergency room around 8 a.m. I finally had surgery at midnight after a day of doctors coming in and out of my room. It was a teaching hospital, and I was considered a fascinating case. After the surgery, the anesthesiologist told me I had been bleeding internally all day. Another hour or so, and I would have died. Story 20. Depression and loneliness. During my sophomore year of college, I was about to fail the semester, had made no friends, and was struggling with clinical depression. I self-harmed on a particularly bad night and had to get stitches at the emergency room. I don't know why I changed my mind or managed to stop myself from going further, but most days I am glad I did. Story 21. The health system trapped me in mental hospitals for 5 long years. Being stripped of my dignity and dehumanized for so long almost killed me. It nearly destroyed any light I had left. But now I am thriving, happy, and enjoying my hobbies and my life. Story 22. An abusive narcissistic parent did not directly almost kill me, despite letting numerous major health issues linger without taking me to the doctor, including a black mold lung infection. However, the daily abuse and bullying by a single parent you cannot escape from is a fate worse than death. There is no reason to live when every second of your life can devolve into a grown woman's insane tantrums and delusions. Story 23. I was over 65 and did not get a heart scan. I was doing things like refereeing junior high basketball games, working out 4 days a week at the gym, and riding my road bike 20 miles at a time. Genetics almost killed me when I died on my couch from 2 clogged and 1 blocked artery. My wife saved me by noticing I didn't look good, calling emergency services, and starting CPR. Great doctors and a 2-week hospital stay saved my life. Long story short, if you are in your 60s, spend less than $100 and get a heart scan. Story 24. When I was 11, my mother had a psychotic episode. When she was psychotic, she believed she was hearing the infallible voice of God. She took me on a walk for hours in a remote area in the middle of the night with the purpose of ascending to heaven. It was in the Canadian prairies in winter, and the temperatures were below freezing. I was not properly dressed for the winter, was losing feeling in my limbs, and was fighting to stay awake. I used a nearby grain bin as a marker to know how far we were walking and kept my fingers moving to maintain circulation. I was completely calm that night and focused. She and I did not talk. We just walked. Before we turned around to make the long stretch home, she pulled me into a ditch and had me put my arms around her shoulders and lift my feet from the ground. Obviously, we did not ascend to heaven, but we fell on our knees in the snow together. In that moment, it did not matter who we were or how we got there. I felt the concept of mortality for the first time and felt unbelievably human. Fortunately, there was no snowfall or wind chill that night. Otherwise, we would have succumbed to the elements. Story 25. I called the ambulance because my condition worsened with a high fever lasting several days. I had never been this sick in my entire life. When I arrived a few hours later, I was so tired that I closed my eyes, and everything turned gray. Not black, just gray. I woke up over 1 month later. I had been placed in a coma and woke up in the intensive care unit. Although I was very upset they woke me up, I guess I am lucky to have survived. To this day, I still experience the same pain and symptoms as when I was sick, which was about 3 years ago. I also have severe memory problems and struggle significantly with thinking and processing information. My lungs have scars all over them, and I can barely walk up a hill without stopping and struggling to breathe. I sometimes wish I had not survived because now I have to deal with a body that no longer functions properly. I don't believe it will ever get better. Story 26. Surrounding myself with toxic narcissistic human beings, which seems to be most of society these days. Story 27. Gallbladder. Get those sharp, stabbing pains near your ribs checked before I did. Gangrenous and sepsis are not two words you want to hear when speaking about an organ removed in an emergency. During surgery, they couldn't regulate my oxygen levels, and my organs began shutting down. Anyway, my gallbladder is no longer with us, but I am. Story 28. I had kidney stones that were lodged and caused an infection. I ended up in the hospital. I experienced chest tightness and pain, but the doctor released me a few days later. I went back to the emergency room the next day and was admitted again with pneumonia. They had to drain my lung because I had so much fluid built up. I was only 26. It was a very scary moment. Story 29. A riptide caught me when I was 12 years old on holiday with my family in Cyprus. My parents were arguing and did not notice I was drowning. Thankfully, I survived by using the last of my strength to swim to the side away from the riptide and let the waves carry me back to shore. It was really scary, and I still think about it to this day. Story 30. During the coronavirus disease pandemic, my kidneys failed. It was very awful. By the time I arrived at the hospital, I was in sepsis. The medical team did not think I was going to survive. My wife could not come to the hospital due to coronavirus disease restrictions, and I was terrified of dying and then catching coronavirus disease and possibly dying. I recovered, but it was a tough ordeal. Story 31. For a short time, my feelings of being worthy were never met nor even attempted to be met. I almost died. Story 32. Born with my umbilical cord wrapped around my neck. Nearly drowned. Nearly ended my life on multiple occasions. Almost fell into oncoming traffic due to an intense dizzy spell. Story 33. Crystal meth and alcohol did not necessarily literally kill me. However, had I not gone to rehabilitation nearly 18 years ago and stayed clean and sober, I might very well have been dead by now. Story 34. I fell into an uncovered septic tank when I was 4 or 5 years old. Luckily, my grandfather saw me and pulled me out. Otherwise, I would have drowned. Story 35. That shotgun looked really helpful, man. I decided against it. I made uncomfortable decisions, learned how to live for myself, and I have never been happier. Story 36. Brain seizure that was somehow caused by alcohol. I am glad that there was a sober person around to call for an ambulance. Story 37. On the flight back from Cancun, the pilot somehow lost control of the plane and almost crashed into a building near Los Angeles International Airport. We saw sky, ground repeatedly, and everyone was screaming until it balanced out and then we landed. Everyone was shocked. I was too young to understand what was happening, to be honest. It happened when I was 10 years old. Later, it turned out we really did almost hit a building, but the pilot regained control in time. That split second of regaining control could have been what saved my life. It gives me goosebumps sometimes. Story 38. Blood clots and pulmonary embolism from a deep vein thrombosis in my leg due to a compressed vein at age 42. I was running 400-meter repeats a week before I went to the emergency room. When they advise moving your legs during a long flight or wearing compression stockings, do it. Story 39. I got a piece of food in my lungs. It was buried in the lining, so it did not show on x-rays. I was coughing hard for 3 months, and nothing fixed it. Eventually, I started coughing up blood. Still nothing showed on x-rays. As a teacher, I had summers off, so I was home alone a lot. On the critical day, I woke up feeling worse than normal and was going to go back to bed. My stepson stopped by to grab something from the house, and I told him I did not feel well and thought I should go to the emergency room. He looked at me and said yes, probably. Had he not been there, I would have just gone back to bed. We got to the emergency room where they did a computerized axial tomography scan and determined that the food had busted through the lining of my lung, was floating around in my body cavity, and I was in sepsis. Within an hour, I was in an ambulance for a 60-mile drive to the nearest major hospital for emergency surgery. Had I not gone to the emergency room, I would have been dead within 3 or 4 hours. As it was, I was basically in a functioning coma for 4 days and in the hospital for 11 more. Story 40. Entitled child in a go-kart thinking he is the next Vin Diesel, not slowing down around the corner, nearly hit me. Story 41. Being inattentive while biking in the local river valley, we did not notice that the trail was getting thinner and thinner until we were on a trail a foot wide with a sheer cliff on one side and a wall on the other. I have never moved so carefully in my life. It would have been certain death if we had fallen. Story 42. A riding lawnmower. My backyard was not flat at all, but for the most part, it was fairly easy to mow up and down a hill. One day I was almost done and was coming up the hill on the last pass when the mower started sputtering. I thought it was almost out of gas and did not want to push it up the hill or walk to get a can. So I was being lazy. I threw it in high gear. That was a mistake because I then started rolling backward. For some reason, my brake wouldn't work. I didn't have time to jump, so I ended up in a barbed wire fence at the bottom of the hill. If that fence hadn't been there, I would have gone end over end, and if not killed, I would have been severely injured due to the woods and trees beyond the fence. Story 43. Stroke at 13 years old. I bled out at school right after physical education. I remember hearing a loud pop while walking to the next class. I was in class thinking, this headache is terrible. I will go have a nap during lunch. For some reason, counselors came in that day. When they got to my table, I guess something was off with my face, so they took me out. I collapsed in the hallway. The last thing I remember was writing down my dad's phone number on something. The strange thing is my dad was at work in his shop in a remote area. He had just decided to put that phone in for no reason at all, just a feeling, he said. So when they needed him to release liability to proceed, they had it. I was sent to one hospital where they transferred me to Lucille Packard Children's Hospital. I was in and out of consciousness the entire time. After the surgery, I was in a coma for 1 day. I had to have a follow-up surgery to fix the underlying cause of the stroke, a cluster of abnormal veins known as an arteriovenous malformation. The following year, my brother passed away on the same day. I'm not religious and I'm not spiritual at all. But I felt it in my gut that I was supposed to die that day, and when I didn't, my brother had to take my place. Story 44. An abscess tonsil when I was 9. When we went to the emergency room to get it checked, the doctor quickly took me to a room. They told my mom that if we had waited another day, I probably would have choked to death in my sleep. The doctor said I was the bravest little kid because I didn't even flinch when the needle went into my tonsil to drain it. Story 45. Wisdom teeth removal. The doctor did not clean my wounds after the operation, which caused 2 massive abscesses on either side of my mouth that closed my airway. I had to have emergency surgery on the 2nd day. The doctor told me they were flushing pieces of bone and debris from the wounds. I had 2 open wounds left in my mouth to drain and a 1-week hospital stay. I did not realize how quickly it could all go downhill. It was the scariest time of my life. Story 46. We were unloading a tractor off a trailer in 1993. I lowered the back while standing in front of it. I injured my back seriously and had to have my left shoulder reconstructed. If it had been a few inches to the left, I would have been seriously hurt. Story 47. A severe allergy to sulfonamide-based antibiotics caused a fever spike of 106 degrees Fahrenheit, heart arrhythmia, kidney damage, and psychosis. Story 48. An emergency room doctor said I had a urinary tract infection and sent me home with medication. A few days later, I saw my primary care doctor, who said my right kidney was failing. Story 49. Anaphylactic reaction to pistachios. It was genuinely terrifying. I nearly went into anaphylactic shock. Story 50. Myself, mental illness, lack of impulse control, passive suicidal thoughts, and lack of medication. Do not ignore your mental health, friends. Seek help. Story 51. My mother, a registered nurse, purposely gave me an incredibly high dosage of her oxycodone prescription for a toothache I was having. I assumed that since I was a recovering addict, it would be easy to claim I stole her medication and accidentally overdosed. Story 52. Antidepressants. My doctors thought I had bipolar disorder and put me on sertraline. I ended up having serotonin syndrome for several weeks. It led to no sleep, inability to keep food down if I ate at all, and massive paranoia. Then I wanted to drive into a wall, so they took my medication and car keys and realized I have a hormone disorder. Story 53. Someone tried to pass a semi-truck without clearing the oncoming traffic. I was the oncoming traffic. We missed each other by literally an inch, going fast enough that clipping each other's mirrors would have spun us both out. Story 54. Chlorine gas leak at a swimming pool. I was swimming in the middle and inhaled a significant amount. The same happened to 70 other children that day. Story 55. Getting electrocuted, getting shot, a rifle but collapsing a carotid artery. That one time the DC-9 starboard engine exploded, acute alcoholism, cancer. I think that's mostly it. Story 56. 1. A car hit me. I have lived with the consequences of my injuries ever since. 2. A rapist. 3. I fell and broke the first and second cervical vertebrae, which is normally fatal or causes quadriplegia. If that was not enough, I also broke my nose, hand, and radius. Then a car almost ran over me because the driver did not see me lying on the pavement. Other than that, life has been good. Really. Story 57. Methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. I think I got it at the gym. I was in the hospital for weeks, and recovery continued at home for months. Estimated time of arrival. Also, that time I lost the trail in the Green Mountains. That was the most scared I have ever been. Story 58. At age 14, I was found by someone under their parked car. It was a hit and run. This was in 1977. I woke up in the hospital with a broken leg and both my parents there. Story 59. Sliding off a wet metal roof. Screws ripping my clothing as I slide on my back. My heels stopped me from going over the edge when they hooked into the gutter. Story 60. Being whipped while I was naked and covered with oil until I was almost unconscious 24 years ago. There was blood on my wall. Years later, I still have scars on my left leg. Here is a better picture. Story 61. I was grooming a senior cat, up to date on vaccines. Senior cats especially have incredibly gross mouths. He bit through the gap in my pinky knuckle. I immediately went into shock. My client told me at the next appointment that I walked around her house dripping blood, saying, "I'm fine." While she wasn't looking, she said I left. She did not know where I was. Turns out I drove myself up the road to urgent care. The next thing I remember is walking through the doors and saying, "I was bitten by a cat." They started an intravenous line for pain medication, antibiotics, and fluids, and flushed the wound. My blood pressure was 220/112. They insisted I go to the hospital, but I did not. When I went home, I drew a line around the swelling and went to bed. The next day, I could not stay conscious. I kept vomiting and passing out, then coming to feeling hotter than fire, then passing out again to come to feeling so cold I could not function. I went to the hospital that day. On the way, I felt my body shutting down. My brain told me, "You are dying, but all this pain will be gone." So I relaxed. I spent 4 days in the hospital battling sepsis. I still groom that cat. Story 62. A friend who got into scuba diving acquired a lot of extra gear. He told the dive master that he would not need to rent equipment because he would be using the dive master's spare set. The pressure gauge did not work properly, and thankfully the dive master noticed this and made him get out of the water. The gauge indicated that there was about 1/3 of the tank remaining when in reality it was almost empty. Story 63. Stabbed in the chest. Missed everything. Ran for what felt like ages with a steak knife in me before my adrenaline dropped or shock set in, and I thought I was a goner. Story 64. Should have died in a small plane crash. At the last minute, I overruled the person I was flying with and diverted to a different airport. When we landed, we checked the weather at the other airport, and the microburst over that airport would have killed us without a doubt. Always trust your gut, especially in aviation. Story 65. Racing my cousin through our neighborhood on an all-terrain vehicle as a kid. I had the lead and tried to take a sharp left to lose him, but did not make the turn and barreled into a boulder the exact height of the all-terrain vehicle. I was catapulted off and flew headfirst into a tree. Without a helmet, I would have been fatally injured. Thankfully, I was wearing a racing helmet with a jaw bar that provided neck support, which likely saved me from death or paralysis. I literally popped right back up off the ground instead. Wear your helmet. Story 66. 1. Cerebral venous sinus thrombosis, a rare blood clot in the brain. When I was 4 years old, I had my winter hat tied on tightly. My golden retriever was playing tug-of-war with the pom-pom on top, and the tightly tied strings were strangling me until my dad ran out barefoot in the snow to save me. I choked on pot roast when I was 6, turned blue, and lost consciousness until my parents held me upside down and the food fell out. Story 67. 1. Meningitis. 2. Motorcycle-accident. 3. Bad landing gear on a plane. 4. Fried calamari. 5. Coronavirus 3 times. Basically once a decade since I was 20. According to friends, I am a cat. Story 68. Depression, but I beat it and continue to beat it with exercise, healthy life decisions, and my comic book art. Story 69. These are both so foolish it's hard to believe, but the first time I almost hung myself. There was a playground with a rope hanging, and I wanted to see if my head could fit between 2 of the knots. I grabbed a plastic bin that was outside in a sandbox and stood on it to reach since I was too short. The bin slipped from under my feet, and I think my legs stretched to reach the bin where it slid. The second incident, I was crossing Interstate 47 and got hit by a car going 63 miles per hour. I can walk and everything. Story 70. My anorexia caused me to weigh 75 pounds and develop heart problems and constant muscle spasms due to low potassium. I have since recovered. Story 71. I almost got taken out by several large limbs of the maple tree in my backyard when an abrupt microburst hit the neighborhood. I was pushed against the fence between properties by the branches. I figure that if I had been standing anywhere else in the yard, I would have ended up in the hospital or worse. Story 72. My mom was driving in the middle of the night on Dead Cow Road, speeding. I had a broken left arm, glass embedded in my throat, and my head was busted open. First responders said it was a miracle I survived. Story 73. I developed asthma suddenly at age 13. We initially thought it was bronchitis. It became so severe that my lips turned blue, my shoulders were raised to my ears, and I could not walk more than 5 steps without needing to sit down. A doctor in the emergency room told one of my parents that I had only a few hours left to live. Story 74. I am not going to go into detail, but I had a scare with my wife about a year ago. She spent the night in the hospital, and I was very scared I was going to lose her. They had to pry me from her bedside. My advice to everyone is to appreciate every moment you have with the ones you love. You never know when they will be gone. To quote Eddie Vedder at Pink Pop 2000, if you have good friends, love them while they are here. Story 75. Almost suffocated myself while playing at a McDonald's playground when I was 7. I made friends with a girl there, and we were playing on an enclosed slide. She started stuffing big rubber balls about the size of the slide opening into the bottom of the slide while I was going down. At one point, instead of pushing the ball out with my feet, which was the point of the game, I realized my legs were stuck under it and I was sliding under the ball. It ended up pressing on my lungs above me. Story 76. I was backpacking around Venice in Italy when suddenly a piece of brick fell off the side of an old building and shattered around my feet. If I had taken one more step forward, it would have hit my head. People rushed over to see if I was okay, but I definitely was not okay mentally. You can live a healthy life, eat well, and exercise, but still be extremely unlucky. I was lucky that day. Story 77. I had a cracked canine tooth for about a year that I never took care of. It never hurt, so why bother? Well, a bacterial infection caused a transient ischemic attack stroke that almost killed me while driving. Go to the dentist if you have issues. Story 78. I was about 8 years old and got sucked into a whirlpool in one of those large wave pools. It held me on the bottom until someone grabbed my arm and pulled me up. Story 79. A doctor, when he tried to discharge me after an accident, told me how lucky I was and that after the urine sample came back I would be good to go. I said, unless you are using osmosis, I never urinated in a cup. Less than an hour later, I was on a life flight to a better hospital with a perforated colon, for units of blood transfused, 2 collapsed lungs, and a week later I woke up from a coma. Story 80. I will never forget a decade ago in Poland. My mother was driving me in the car, and we were turning left onto some train tracks. My mother did not notice, and if it had been 2 seconds earlier, we would have been dead. Story 81. Nearly drowned in swim class when I was 6. Nearly drowned again at 9 when a friend and I were playing on an ice-covered pond and the ice broke beneath me. I managed to get up and off the ice. I don't take risks in water anymore. I couldn't swim properly until I was 11. Story 82. Random tree nut allergy appeared unexpectedly. I ate 4 pieces of toast with Nutella on top. A joyful meal I had enjoyed several times before that day. It was not a joyful time when I could not breathe. I still miss Nutella. I know allergies can come and go, so part of me hopes that I am no longer allergic, but I am also not entirely willing to take that chance. Story 83. The walk-in clinic doctor who told me to apply a Mepilex bandage on my near-sepsis leg wound for a week caused my leg to begin rotting within 2 days of his advice. Story 84. COVID-19 is a serious illness that is still present. I am a healthy 21-year-old and had to be hospitalized. Story 85. Roller coaster ride during a school field trip. Staff locked us into our seats, but mine did not make the click sound. I noticed it was loose. Then the ride started ominously creaking forward. I knew I was in danger. I was too paralyzed to scream that something was wrong. Thankfully, another staff member made a final check and secured the belt for me. I think both of us were nervous when the realization hit, but neither said anything. I could have died that day. Story 86. 1. Mystery illness that was not meningitis. Breaking through a window and nearly slicing my throat. Intoxicated driver. Story 87. The allergists are still not sure. Shout out to the emergency medical technician who said my throat was not closing. I would have yelled at you, but alas, I could not talk because my throat was closing. Story 88. A horse I was riding tried to run after other horses. I had just had major surgery a few weeks ago and was told not to let him run. I tried to hold him back, but he reared up and fell back on me. The saddle horn missed my chest by a couple of inches. Story 89. Trying to fit in somewhere I clearly was not meant to be. Drugs and alcohol caused me to overdose more times than I would like to admit. Story 90. A skid steer with bypassed safeties. It was an old case uniloader with the bucket controls on the same sticks as the directional controls. I stopped the skid steer with a heavy scraper blade up in the air and climbed out with the engine running. My shirt tail caught on the control stick. I was literally dancing with the skid steer, it spinning in circles, and me trying to avoid being run over while also trying to get my shirt tail loose. It was not until later that I realized how close I came to death. It would not have taken much of a sideways tug with the shirt tail to bring the whole thing down on top of me. Story 91. My depression. The feeling of absolute loneliness. Almost falling off a cliff into white water rapids while hiking one time. Story 92. Went out with my friends last night, and the one driving snapped at his girlfriend because of their toxic relationship. He put all of our lives in danger by repeatedly taking his eyes completely off the road just to argue better. He refused to take fault for anything, including bringing up my past relationship, which was completely out of line. I decided while it was happening that I am completely done with them, at least until they break up and can see more clearly. Story 93. Which time? There was the knife attack. There was the near drowning. There was the group beating by the bikers. There was the car rollover at 70 miles per hour. Oh, and a couple of diseases along the way nearly did it too. Story 94. Diabetes. I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 3 years old. Although I do not remember it, my parents told me that when I arrived at the hospital, I was already turning blue. Story 95. Leukemia and subsequent neutropenic sepsis occurred midway through treatment. 6 years post-bone marrow transplant at the moment and all is going well. I recently had a daughter using the sperm I froze the day after diagnosis. I still take imatinib each day to hopefully prevent relapse. Not a day goes by when I do not worry about it, but I am mostly otherwise fit and well, aside from needing testosterone replacement and medication for erectile dysfunction. Story 96. Double pneumonia. I spent New Year's Eve being wheeled to the intensive care unit and put on 8 liters of oxygen. My oxygen saturation was 73, and I was coughing so hard I fractured 5 ribs. I am still out of work and on oxygen. Story 97. Non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs recommended by my doctor. I never took more than the recommended dose. One day, I randomly passed out on the street. It turns out they caused internal hemorrhaging stomach ulcers. I needed 2 blood transfusions to stabilize. Now it is in my medical records that I can never take non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs again, which is difficult for someone with chronic pain. Story 98. Medical problems. I was diagnosed with diabetes at the age of 15. I was 28 when my appendix ruptured. Last year, I was diagnosed with breast cancer and underwent a full double mastectomy, which removed all the cancer. I developed a secondary infection from the surgery that nearly took my life. In my 20s, my dog, weighing over 70 pounds, ran across me while I was on the floor stretching. She trampled my head and neck, nearly crushing my windpipe. At that moment, life truly flashed before my eyes. She was just playing, so I was not angry with her, but I was afraid to be on the floor with her for a long time. Story 99. A microwave burrito. It was frozen in the middle and hotter than the surface of the sun on the outside. I took one bite and burned my tongue, choked from the shock, slipped on the floor trying to spit it out, hit my head on the counter. My cat ran away screaming. I saw my ancestors in high definition. 10 out of 10 would not recommend. But I finished it, because I am not a quitter. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.